Well, would you look at the time? That's right, if you take a look at the Challenges tab in-game, the global tournament for Season 12 is going to be once again starting up this Sunday. Of course, that means you guys will have a chance to earn trade tokens galore as well as a super valuable set of bonus rewards if you do decide to spend gems on those. And for those of you that are adventurous enough, the glorious Ultimate Flex emote is also within reach. Hey guys, Legendaray here, and today I'm going to be going over the top 5 decks to run in this upcoming global tournament and just the May meta in general. Of course, with 11 cards being balanced in the recent May balance changes, that means that a lot of decks that worked previously simply are not as effective and have been replaced by quite a few up and coming decks. Of course, if you find a deck that does interest you, be sure to play test it first. Play it against some friends or in a classic challenge, just so that you guys have an idea of how the deck runs personally. Anyways, before I get into that, be sure to leave a like down below and subscribe to my channel for more videos like this one. Also, go check me out on my social media, links down below, and if you'd like to support me, feel free to use code Legendaray in game. And with all that out of the way, let's get right into the list. Number 1, Royal Hogs Fireball Bait. Now this is a deck that was already pretty meta last month, but of course with the recent buff of the Magic Archer range, this deck is definitely back in all of its glory. The 3 Fireball Bait cards are of course the Hunter, Magic Archer, and the Royal Hogs, and with the newly buffed Royal Delivery, actually does a really good job. Now this deck is a relatively fast-paced deck, so starting off the match, you could probably play something such as the Goblin Cage, or just cycle your Heal Spirit at the bridge. Other than that, if you don't have either of those 2 cards in hand, I would kind of just wait a little bit and then maybe cycle a Magic Archer or a Dark Prince in the back. I wouldn't recommend cycling your Hunter in case your opponent is running a deck that's heavily dependent on air cards, because Hunter is a really well-rounded air defense card. In addition, the Royal Delivery with its recent damage buff is also going to be a major air defense card. So if you're against an air deck, those are the 2 cards that you're definitely going to want to save. Aside from that, this deck is very versatile because it can apply both single lane pressure as well as double lane pressure depending on the matchup. Against decks that are a lot heavier in the splash department, then you're going to want to play a lot of double lane pressure, splitting the Royal Hogs, going maybe Dark Prince in one lane and then splitting the Royal Hogs into the other, and then adding in that Heal Spirit just to add a little bit more immediate pressure. Alternatively, if you're against a bit of a heavier deck that maybe doesn't have as much splash, then you can go ahead and play those Royal Hogs in the same lane and get as much value as you can. Of course, Heal Spirit is super valuable in this deck, being able to heal over half of the HP on the Hunter, the Magic Archer, the Royal Hogs, the Dark Prince, and the Goblin Brawler. Speaking of the Goblin Brawler, he's going to be a very great passive play. When you're at 10 Elixir and you're not sure what to play down that Goblin Cage. That's most likely going to force your opponents to actually make the first move, and that Goblin Cage is also going to break in about 20 seconds and force out another response from your opponent. Again, with this deck, a lot of it is going to be playing reactively to what your opponent has. So again, just know which cards you're going to save for the tanks, which are the Hunter and the Goblin Cage, as well as which cards that you're going to primarily save to deal with splash cards, which are usually going to be the Dark Prince, the Magic Archer, as well as the Royal Delivery. Number 2, Royal Giant Earthquake. Now this deck is, it looks kind of annoying, and it really is annoying to face, but you know what? It hard counters Expo, so some of you might like this one. Now this deck is a cycle deck, being only 2.9 Elixir, so starting off the match, you're going to be just cycling your cards. Skeletons and bats will be in the back, you can cycle a Heal Spirit at the bridge, you can play a Goblin Cage passively, or maybe you can even play the Firecracker, but personally I would not recommend that. As for the Royal Giant, I personally would not play the Royal Giant until you have an idea on what your opponent is playing, because if you play that Royal Giant in the back and your opponent just like expos opposite lane, you're not going to be in for a good time. So once you identify the matchup, then you can begin to play those Royal Giants. Against a cheaper cycle deck, you may want to consider playing that Royal Giant in the back so that you can cycle to a second Royal Giant and then overwhelm your opponent. But against the heavier deck, then you're going to be playing more Royal Giants at the bridge, supporting it with bats, bats, a heal spirit, and the firecracker to get as much value as possible. On the defensive end, of course, you're going to be saving that goblin cage, as that's going to be your main damage output. In addition, again, the Royal Delivery with its increased damage actually gets a lot of value, and once you get that timing down, that Royal Delivery is going to be really deadly. Also, Firecracker is going to be your main air defense, so if you're defending against an air deck, then of course you're going to want to try and play that Firecracker as soon as possible so that you can cycle back to a second Firecracker on defense. Aside from that, as long as you're just constantly cycling those Royal Giants, using that Earthquake to slow down the opponent's troops and get chip damage on the tower, you should be able to take matches pretty easily. The Earthquake does a surprisingly large amount of damage to the crown towers, actually more than a fireball, so spell cycling is 100% an option with this deck. Number 3, Lava Hound Control. So Lava Hound Control is a deck that has consistently just been viable for the past couple of months, and it definitely still will comfortably make this list. Lava Hound has always been one of the easier decks to pick up as well, and you know, the formula is generally pretty easy. You're starting off pretty chill. You can maybe cycle a miner or play down a goblin cage just as a passive play to get your opponents to make the first real commitment, and then once your opponent uses one of their air counters, then you can go ahead and Lava Hound in the back, knowing that that air counter is going to be out of hand. Then after that, just play it kind of similar to a beatdown deck, you know, supporting that Lava Hound with the baby dragons, with an Inferno Dragon, and then a miner when that Lava Hound is going to pop. Of course, you do have to watch out for that spell value, because this deck is mostly consistent of single units. You know, the one baby dragon, one Inferno Dragon, one Lava Hound. That means those troops are going to be a lot more vulnerable to those big spells. On the defensive end, you're going to actually be playing this deck more like a control deck, because the Barbarians, the Baby Dragon, and the Goblin Cage are all really good units at stalling the opponent's pushes and then utilizing tower DPS to get as much value as you can. Of course, with those Barbarians, however, you do have to watch out for spell value, because those Barbarians can, you know, just be one shot by a fireball. That being said, that can also kind of work in your favor, because the Barbarians can draw the fireball out of your opponent's hand, and then your Lava Hound push can just go ahead and wreak havoc. All in all, with this deck, just kind of play it slow, and then once you determine the matchup, then begin to build a big push, making sure to support it with the right cards. Number 4, Goblin Giant Sparky. Now this is, again, just like the Lava Hound deck, a deck that is consistently making the top 5 list for these meta videos, because this deck is so easy to pick up, so easy to learn, and the Sparky is just such a deadly card that your opponents are often just not prepared for. Now with this deck, of course, it's going to be a little bit more on the expensive side, so you're going to be playing a bit more slowly. Starting off the match, I wouldn't really like to make the first play. Maybe cycling bats or the zap spell would be acceptable, but more often than not, I'll be waiting for my opponents to make the first move. After that, then you can kind of play reactively to what your opponent plays. If they're playing an air unit, then maybe play that Musketeer, and if anything else, you can cycle that Mini P.E.K.K.A. or that Dark Prince. Now what I love about this deck so much is that it actually includes the Mini P.E.K.K.A. and the Sparky, and that frees you up a lot for when you're trying to build up a push. For example, if you play down that Sparky and they think that they can rush all their tanks opposite lane, then you can just go ahead and boom, Mini P.E.K.K.A. and take out that entire push, leaving you free to use that Sparky on your own offensive push. Speaking of which, when you're building up an offensive push, I usually would like to do it off of a counter push. So after you defend successfully with a Musketeer or a Mini P.E.K.K.A., then you can kind of Goblin Giant in front of those units to attack the opponent's tower. The Goblin Giant is a really fast moving tank, so it applies a lot of immediate pressure that really puts it onto your opponent to try and scramble together a defense. In addition, the Goblin Giant itself can also be used on defense, as the Spear Goblins in the back can provide some very useful damage, and the tankiness of the Goblin Giant will provide some very useful stalling. Finally, the Earthquake, again, is a very important card in this deck because of Expo. Expo is not the best matchup when it comes to this deck, so that Earthquake comes in really handy to deal with those Expo players. In addition, with its recently buffed damage output, it means that it does a really great job at taking out units and slowing them down, allowing your troops to get as much value as possible on offense. Number 5, Balloon Cycle. Now, of the 5 decks that I'm sharing in this video, Balloon Cycle is one of the harder ones to pick up. That being said, this variation is pretty easy and pretty fail-safe to play. Balloon honestly is a pretty fast moving air card, and combined with other units such as the Ice Golem and that Lumberjack that also move really fast, that Balloon can make it to the tower pretty easily. In addition, with that Heal Spirit being able to deliver some insane healing onto that Balloon if it manages to jump, that means that that Balloon has an even larger chance to jump onto the tower. So this deck is a cycle deck, meaning that starting off the match, you're obviously going to be, cycling your cards, cycling your spells, cycling a Goblin Cage, or cycling that Heal Spirit. Then, after your opponent makes that first move, if they do play one of their major air counters, then just go ahead and Ice Golem Balloon opposite lane and see how your opponent defends that. After that, you're just going to be constantly cycling those balloons and applying constant pressure onto your opponent. This way, they can't build up a big push that overwhelms you, and you're constantly going to be in the driver's seat of the match. Of course, if you are on the defensive end, however, then you're obviously going to rely really heavily on that Musketeer as well as that Goblin Cage. Personally, I would like to play that Musketeer as soon as possible. That way you can cycle back again to a second Musketeer on defense. Lumberjack and Goblin Cage are going to be your major tank controls and are both units that can also provide a lot of counter pushing value and can really effectively tank for a balloon. All in all, keep applying high pressure onto your opponent, and then eventually you should be able to chip down their tower. Because even if you just consistently get the balloon death damage to the tower, that's a couple hundred damage each and every time, which combined with chipping with some logs and some snowballs will eventually get you the win. So there we go, the top 5 decks to run in this upcoming Season 12 global tournament. The decks I shared today are 5 decks that are relatively easy to pick up and also excel at dealing with all the other meta decks that you might face. Of course, there are definitely other decks for you guys to run, but you definitely can't go wrong with any of the 5 decks that I've showcased today. So, what decks are you guys going to be running in the upcoming global tournament? Be sure to let me know down below. But unfortunately, guys, that's all I've got time for in today's episode. Huge thanks to all of my channel members. You guys are the absolute G's. If you enjoyed, please leave a like down below as well as a subscription to my channel. And as always, this is Legendaray, and I'm signing off. See you guys next time.